problem, but Mr. Crocket, blah, 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 blah. We've got Elvis Nolalos, and oh boy, Ruben from the Ruby Tuesday, or rather your middle-aged, bearded, jolly white fat man. And today we're diving into the latest Hulu original, Mr. Crocket. This is directed by Brandon Epsey, and I was really excited going into this one. We've got Elvis Nolasco in the titular role as Mr. Crocket. You got Jericka Hinton doing her thing, and a premise that should have had me glued to the screen throughout. But let's just say this flick didn't quite hit the horror high notes I was hoping for. The first thing I'm going to talk about in this review is its tone. This movie wants to be a mix of airy vibes you get from films like Black Phone, the creepy childhood nostalgia from Poltergeist, and even some of that Nic Cage campy horror you get in Willy's Wonderland. It doesn't nail any of them. It's like trying to hit a home run in 3 different ballparks at one time, or trying to do the butterfly in a swimming race, and the movie is me, and everyone else is a professional swimmer or mildly healthier. Okay, so you get what I'm talking about. Enough with the sports analogies. You've got the creepy house vibe, the supernatural elements, and the haunted father figure thing going on. But it all kind of feels half-baked. Like there's potential, but Epsey didn't seem to know what exactly he wanted to do with this horror. It kind of picks at some of the best, but it's not the sum of all the parts. Elvis Nolasco, though, let's give this man his due. He commits to the role of Mr. Crocket. He's menacing, sure, but in that low kind of key way where you're not totally sure if you're scared of him or just kind of uncomfortable at first. And when he needs to be nuts, he's just that. Bonkers crazy in a horror vibe sort of way that's reminiscent of Willy's Wonderland, like I mentioned earlier. He works with the script and character he has been given and does a good job with it. Jericka Hinton plays the concerned mother figure, and she brings her A-game as usual. If you've seen her in many TV roles, I've seen her in a lot of Grey's Anatomy. The performances are not the issue here though. For the most part, bar a couple of first-time young actors, they're all very good. The cast actually brings a lot of heart to the story, but the script and the pacing just don't give them the material that they need to really shine. Now, thematically, the movie leans hard into parenting and the fear that comes with protecting your kids from the big bad world. And hey, that's a legit theme to explore in a horror. If you're a parent and the horror movie you are watching is about kids, it hits differently. We saw this done really well with Poltergeist, where the horror and the family drama are tightly woven together, and even the Black Phone, which threw in the terrifying child abduction element. You know, Black Phone had elements of that as well. We've seen it done well before. But Mr. Crocket tries to go the message route about parenting, and it ends up feeling a bit too much at times. It's not preachy, but it's close to getting there. Do you remember the Airy Indiana or Goosebumps series? Each story or each episode often had a moral of the story moment at the end, kind of letting the viewers know what they should have learned from this harrowing experience. This film kind of feels like it's doing that at times, and that's fine as long as the horror in the movie is in equal parts. And speaking of the horror or the scares, let's get into that. Or should I say, lack of scares. Yeah, there are a few moments that almost get you, and a jump scare at the end that shouldn't be in the movie at all. But nothing really sticks when it comes to the scares. I wanted Poltergeist level chills, that slow sense of dread, that slow burn sense of dread, that heightens that ante when you have that atmosphere and tone. There are a few jump scares and a few exciting moments, and sometimes those start to build the atmosphere, and there's a decent amount of gore to compensate for the lack of everything else this film needs. The best part of this horror is when it leans into the horror aspect of things, into the body horror and creature features. I felt like I was watching at times an old body horror movie set in the 80s, or something akin to The Thing at times. And then it feels like I'm watching an episode of Airy Indiana. And then in the next scene I feel like I'm watching a parenting drama, completely going all over the place in tones and themes. There's a scene midway through the movie that reminded me a bit of Willy's Wonderland. It's quirky, it's strange, it has this weird energy, like it's supposed to be a fun horror weird thing, but then it just fizzles out. It never goes full tilt into that wild, zany territory. That, if it had done that and leaned that way, I think it would have really been a blast. And if it had leaned into that weirdness, I'd probably having a different conversation now about this movie. But instead, it tries to toe the line between supernatural thriller and straight up horror, and it ends up feeling a little toothless. It's set in the 90s, and the use of this time isn't used nearly as much as it could have been. Leaning into the nostalgia of the 90s horror tropes and the movies that are made that time would have worked wonders for this movie. If you're thinking campy Scream type vibe-esque with this sort of nostalgia aesthetic, with this sort of Willy's Wonderland theme, I think that could have worked wonders. And we should also talk about the ending for a second without doing spoilers. Let's just say it tries to be emotional, tries to leave you with some big takeaway about family and sacrifice, but it doesn't land. It's one of those moments where you're like, okay, I see what you're doing, but the execution's not there. It leaves you more confused than anything else, not in a good mind-bending horror way. It essentially has two endings. One is the sort of happy ending that a lot of people like to have, including myself. And then there's another ending that is kind of setting it up for the possibility of future sequels, and then kind of undoes the whole ending sequence they just did. So yeah, Mr. Crocket pulls off some great horror inspiration moments, but it's like trying to bake a cake with all the right ingredients, but with none of the measurements. You've got pieces of The Black Phone, Poltergeist, Willy's Wonderland, but it never manages to stick the landing with any of them for me. I was disappointed because the performances here are fairly good. Our main protagonists both chew up the screen time. There is some great body horror in here and some really great creature creations that I love. There are parts in here that are just fantastic. There's some death scenes that I was like, wasn't expecting that. But the sum of all the parts doesn't quite make it worth your while. I'm giving it 2 Nicolas Cages out of 5.
You got one.
It's not terrible, but it's not memorable either. If you're into horror, you might appreciate some of the performances. And hey, if you're a parent, maybe the themes will resonate a bit more with you. But if you're looking for a movie that's going to give you nightmares or even a solid thrill ride, I don't think this will quite fit for you. Alright, that's it from me. Let me know what your thoughts are of Mr. Crocket in the comments below. Did it hit the horror mark for you, or were you left as underwhelmed as I was? Happy spooky month, my favorite time of the year, and remember, live long and Tuesday.